Hey there friends, welcome back to As a Man Thinketh on Yanasa TV. So I had done a video a couple weeks ago, and it was one of the earlier videos on this topic, talking about the water curtailment in Idaho. And there's been a lot of conversations and a lot of things that have been brought to light since that time. Fortunately, I've been up in the Northeast for a celebration of life, so I haven't been able to get back on here and talk about it, but I think that it is important for people to understand what exactly is happening in Idaho. And by exactly, I just mean, I'm going to share with you what I know, and you can draw your own conclusions from this. But I would say that Idaho farmers are in big trouble. The people that they are up against are not people that they can easily defeat, because the people they are up against are you and I, our government. So somebody had sent me some information on the cobalt mines in Idaho, and asking if, the reason why they were trying to curtail the water was to bankrupt the Idaho farmers. The timing of the curtailment is, well, it's questionable, right? Because they waited until after the farmers had invested $400 an acre in fertilizer, and who only knows how much in seed potatoes and seeds. I mean, some of these estimates that I've heard have been upwards of over $1,000 an acre invested by these farmers into farming land and providing us with food. So the question then becomes, are they purposefully trying to put them out of business to steal their land? I did look into the Cobalt Strip in Idaho, and for those of you who don't know, cobalt is mined for clean energy, and it's usually, most of the time, the cobalt is mined out of the Congo in Africa. And this is a horrible process. I mean, for those of you who are dedicated to your electric cars, think about it this way. The cobalt mines in Africa, they are one of the most modern day sources of enslavement in the world. They are extremely dirty mines. They cause an extraordinary amount of pollution. They have here in the United States as well, right there in Idaho. So when you think about clean energy and what it actually looks like, this is what it looks like they're doing to our national forests to extract this element that they need to create clean energy, expand our electrical grids, build more electric cars. But the cobalt mine in Idaho is a little different than what you're seeing in Congo, because as you know, most of these things have to be mined and taken to China to be turned into products that we buy as consumers. The cobalt in Idaho, though, is a different ball game altogether, and I'm going to get into that. But looking at the cobalt field in Idaho, it does stretch into some of the farmlands in question. So it does raise some eyebrows, saying, is there cobalt underneath those farms? How much money is that worth? What are they willing to do for it? But I also, I'm not sure how far it stretches underneath the farms. I don't think it's a large amount of farms. And they haven't even gotten that far with mining yet. I feel like this is a future problem that they may run into. And, this is what we know about cobalt in Idaho, is just what's been discovered. That doesn't mean that there's not more to that field that has not been discovered. They're mining again on property owned by the U.S. government, our national forests. That's where these mines actually happen. The bigger question, I think, that comes into this is, the water usage that it takes to mine cobalt. And that's what this entire water curtailment was about. And if you wanted to come up with a long-term solution, putting the farmers out of business would be that long-term solution. The farmers, though, in this case, they're not just up against the cobalt mines. And I think that the cobalt mines are rather interesting, because when we get into this, you'll see that money that we pass to go to aid in Ukraine is actually going to this Australian cobalt mine in Idaho. And the reason for that is the U.S. Department of Defense is preparing for World War III. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, and buts about it. We need that cobalt for our weapons, for our national security. It's not going into electric vehicles like a lot of people say, or these other things. It is actually going into our defense. We can't rely on China if we end up in war with China to supply us with cobalt for our weapons. So I think that there's a big issue there as far as, you know, it's one of the only cobalt mines in the United States. It is one of the largest cobalt strips in the United States. There's also cobalt in Montana, not far above, you know, the Idaho cobalt area. But it does bring into question, you know, do we have to have this cobalt for our national defense? And if so, you know, what does happen to farmers out there? Personally, I'm not in favor of World War III, so I'd rather we not mine the cobalt and we keep the farmers. But I'm just throwing this information out there so you can see what exactly these farmers are up against. They're not up against saving generations of farmland, providing food for the masses. I mean, heck, if you make food more scarce, it's easier to control the masses, right? And if we end up in a situation where we are in World War III and we're heading toward in that direction faster than we ever have, then you want that control over the public, and you want that resource for our weapons. For those of you who question me about, you know, the possibilities of heading towards a global war, think about this. They've been working really hard lately at changing the rules of the draft, making it automatic for men of 18 to 25 to just be automatically enrolled in the draft. You're required to enroll in the draft. They're also talking about including women in the draft. So guys, if you're trying to self-identify to get out of the draft, it's not gonna work. Anyway, why are all these things happening? Because if you look at global conflict around the world, that is the direction we are heading. And nobody's really doing a whole lot to stop it, you know? We're just heading that way. So I think that, you know, the Idaho farmers are up against something in the near future that is ultimately going to be difficult for them to handle on their own. We as a nation, you know, hopefully can turn that situation around for them, but it's going to take a lot more than just people talking about, well, I mean, talking about what's going on in Idaho is definitely going to start, you know, the conversation. But we really have to think about, you know, all of these complications that are coming up, and, you know, the fact that that is where we can get cobalt out of the ground in the United States. So they put $15 million out of this cobalt mine in Idaho. Hasn't been profitable. I mean, it was purchased from a Canadian company in 2019. They reopened it in 2022, then they shut it down because it just wasn't profitable. But now that they've got the DOD coming in and funding them through the Ukraine bill, you know, they're back on track. They're exploring, they're finding new cobalt, they're finding ways to extract that cobalt, and the entire mine is moving forward. So that is a major water user. The other major user in this area, I don't know if you guys have been paying attention to this, but Meta is opening these massive data centers, close to 1 million square feet in some locations. And they're opening one right there in Idaho. And they're going to be another competitor for groundwater because they use a ton of groundwater to cool their system. Some people said as much as an Olympic swimming pool a day. It's not as much as an Olympic swimming pool a day. Olympic swimming pools are 660,000 gallons. They're using as much as 2.5 million gallons of water a day to cool their systems. And these databases are also important to our government because our government is able to access information on its constituents, its citizens, without their knowledge. I mean, think about it. Every time you post something on Facebook or you're searching on Facebook, you don't think about the fact that everything you do, every move you make, that system is tracking you, learning what your face looks like, learning what your kids look like. Facebook data centers are one of the most important things to our government. And they're putting these data centers in everywhere, and they're constantly taking water rights away from US citizens, US farms, just to put in a data center so they could have more information on you. So that's two big things that I think the farmers in Idaho are facing right now. Two major water users are coming in. And the other thing is with these data centers, they employ a ton of people. I mean, think about the money. I mean, a lot of people talk about the money here. When you look at cobalt mining, think about the riches in those elements that are coming out of the ground, and they're going everywhere. It's like the new gold rush of the 21st century, because everybody wants cobalt to expand infrastructure, electrical infrastructure, to put everybody in electric cars. Doesn't matter how horrible these mines are. They actually considered the mine there in Idaho to be a Superfund site because of how much pollution it has caused. And when they use water, it gets back into the groundwater system. So a lot of those farms, just from this mine operating, are going to get contaminated anyway. I mean, there's not. I mean, at this point in time, they'll probably get paid out at some point in time. They'll probably get contaminated. But this is what we want, right? This is the way that we have been pushing this country. This is the way that we have been pushing this world. Or is it what you want? That's the question. That's what we have to answer when we come around to elections and everything else. And I don't necessarily think the choices are all that great, but I mean, the reality is that we should be able to control the direction this country is going. So with these massive data centers and all the money coming into the area, you're going to look at a large amount of development, because they've got to build houses to house all these people, and they're going to end up building these communities that are more centralized, hopefully not suburban, 5-minute cities, 15-minute cities, for the employees of these companies to live in while they mine and use our water to cool their data systems. But in the meantime, the only ones who can be sacrificed from water usage in that area are the farmers. And the easiest ones to control are the surface water farmers, because most of them rely on most of their water coming from a nonprofit utility company. And that company is a lot easier to work with than a dozen different groundwater users or 6,000 different groundwater users, okay? So it's just, when you think about the control aspects, when you think about how they're going to mitigate the water in the future for these major income producers, and of course our country's defense, the ones who are the easiest to eliminate, the ones who are the hardest to maintain control over, the ones who are the biggest problem, are the farmers who are the groundwater users. And that's what's happening in Idaho. And it's not just happening in Idaho, okay? A lot of this stuff is happening across the United States. Anywhere that these meta centers have gone in, I don't know why they choose to put them in these locations, but they're putting them in these locations and they use so much water. It's wiping out farmers. And then when you look at, these mining operations that could have the potential to generate a significant amount of money for the US government, as well as supply the Department of Defense with critical elements that they need for building weaponry, especially going into another global war. These farmers face a challenge that is well beyond them. It is well beyond what they can fight on their own. This is something that every single one of you, if you disagree with these things, you need to speak up and start saying something. You need to start putting some of these issues at the forefront of your mind and think about what you can be doing to help. What we do is we raise awareness about it. We let people know about it. We let people think about the consequences on both sides of what's happening. It's up to you to decide whether or not you think that the Department of Defense is more important than the farmers, or if you think that being able to track people on Facebook is more important than farmers, more important than your own food security. I mean, that comes into, like I said at the beginning of this video, a whole other thing. I mean, if you create food scarcity and you cut back on people's resources for food, you have better control over them. Stay tuned. I'm going to do another video on what's happening in Michigan, because what's happening in Michigan is absolutely horrific. And like I said, these people are fighting these battles every day. I would say that farmers are on the front lines of your right to have agency over your own body. And we're just not paying enough attention to it. I honestly think that if what happened in Idaho didn't go national on an election year, they would have proceeded with the curtailment. If people all across the United States didn't start seeing it, didn't start talking about it and making videos go viral, it would have happened. The only thing that saved those farmers was the massive amount of response that they got from the public when people started posting videos about it. It was too much attention. They had to change the game. They'll be back next year. Anyway, guys, stay tuned and stay safe, and remember to support the right to farm.